Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. My name is Andrew Samwick, and I'm the director of the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center here at Dartmouth. Each year, the Rockefeller Center contributes to the college's celebration of Martin Luther King Jr., both financially and through its own programming. This afternoon, in collaboration with the William Jewett Tucker Center, it is my great pleasure to welcome back to campus Reverend Leah Daughtry, a member of the Dartmouth class of 1984. I first met Leah Daughtry when she joined the Board of Visitors at the Rockefeller Center over a decade ago. Her insights and advice were important for the staff and me as we started to design the curricular and co-curricular programs that have made the center such an essential element of a Dartmouth education. Throughout her experiences as the Chief Executive Officer of the 2016 National Democratic Convention, a role she also played in the historic 2008 convention, she has helped keep Dartmouth relevant in the presidential nominating process. One of the perks of my job is that I frequently get to welcome Leah back to campus. For example, this summer, she joined my social entrepreneurship course to discuss her work as a mentor in the Reconnecting McDowell program, which seeks to provide mentorship and opportunity to young people in McDowell County, West Virginia, one of the most socioeconomically disadvantaged areas of the country. This afternoon is not even the first time I've had the pleasure of introducing her for an MLK celebration. I remember doing this 9 years ago. 9 years. So much has changed in that period, but perhaps nothing more so than the technology for communication and the ways that we use it. Communication plays a fundamental role in the relationship between the citizen and the state. Communication, broadly understood, has helped shine a light on the lingering disparities in the treatment of minority communities and their members in modern America. Think of all the ways that media, both professional and amateur, have covered and shaped our understanding of the demonstrations in Ferguson, Missouri, and on college campuses over the last year. Take a moment to also consider how our understanding of the violent arrest and tragic death of Sandra Bland last summer in a Southeast Texas jail was shaped by a dashboard camera in a police car, ostensibly recording a routine traffic stop. New communication technology will bring more data to more people, but it is a separate question as to whether we are prepared to deal with that deluge. Do we have the ability to sift through that deluge and find the most important bits? Do we take the time to be thoughtful as we consider it? I sometimes remark that Martin Luther King did not send a tweet from a Birmingham Starbucks. He wrote a letter from jail, and when it was read, it moved people to deliberate action, not simply an angry response. We celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. each year in recognition of the ongoing struggle to make Dr. King's dream a reality. To make progress in that struggle, we are going to have to communicate with each other about difficult topics, and we are going to have to do it better than we have been doing it recently, and more like we did it at critical moments in our nation's history. So today, we have brought Reverend Daughtry back to campus to help us understand how to engage in an elegant civil discourse on issues of significance, whether at a local level or a global level. My hope is that she will help us think about the impact of our words, our behavior, and our actions. In addition to her work with the Democratic National Convention, Reverend Daughtry is pastor of the House of the Lord Church in Washington, D.C. She is the founder of On These Things, a company that provides strategic planning and management consulting services and that produces high-profile events, such as the closing ceremonies of the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. She is, in brief, a world-class communicator. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Reverend Leah Daughtry.
Good afternoon, Dartmouth. I am thrilled, and I'm going to mess up this technology because I'm going to move stuff. I am thrilled to be here today, and thank you, Andrew, for that warm introduction. I think it's better this time than it was the last time. And to President Hanlon, who has surprised me and delighted me with his presence, I thank you for being here. And to all of you My sisters and brothers, we are thrilled that you have made time this afternoon to spend with us as we talk about the topic, words and their consequences, civil discourse in the 21st century. It is always good for me to be home here in Hanover. I love it very much, and so I try to get back here as much as possible because for me, Dartmouth is my place, and it is home for me, and so when they call, I come. So here I am. This is an auspicious occasion as we prepare to celebrate the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King, which is in fact today. And it is fitting that the topic that was selected for today, words and their consequences, would be the subject for this lecture, given the fact that Dr. King stands in the annals of our history in this country and around the world as a master of civil discourse. And certainly it was his words, the letter from a Birmingham jail, his books, Strength to Love, The Beloved Community, and of course, his iconic speeches, not the least of which was the I Have a Dream speech in August 1963, that are enshrined in our collective memory and have helped to move our nation forward on some of the most pressing and important issues of the day. Dr. King has been a large figure in my life and the life of my family because I was born the day before the March on Washington. And so my father loves to tell the story about how he missed the march because he had to make a decision whether he was going to stay home with his new wife to attend the birth of their first child or whether he was going to go to Washington for what was sure to be an historic moment. My mother says that the reason that they are still married today is because he chose to stay home. And so every year on my birthday, my father, who just celebrated his 85th birthday, calls me to tell me the story and to remind me of his conversation with Dick Gregory, who is a family friend of ours. And Dick Gregory says, well, that's the difference between you and me, Herb. I went to the march. You stayed home. I haven't seen my son since. So we always honor Dr. King in our household, and he plays a special place in my life. As I prepared to speak with you today, I recalled the dozens of speeches that I have surely given and the dozens and dozens more that I have surely heard. And I realized that most of what was said and heard has been lost to time and distance, or the failure of the speaker to craft a takeaway, or better still, an action, as Andrew talked about, and implementable steps that compel the audience to transform their own thinking. I hope not to deliver one of those speeches today, but I want to frame this speech in the wisdom of Proverbs, the philosophical and linguistic artifact that informs and undergirds the two cultures that I most embody, that of an African American woman and that of a person who freely practices her faith. I intend that all that I say, that you hear, tweet, repeat, and most importantly, practice the African and biblical canon proverbs which inform my passion for the art of conversation. So let's begin. Proverbs 18:21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it shall eat of its fruits." The National Institute for Civil Discourse defines civility as the free and respectful exchange of different points of view. And if we were to redact this definition to its simplest form, it is simply to engage in conversation that is intended to get or enhance understanding. And I want to extend that simple definition a little bit further to say that civil discourse is to engage in conversation to get or enhance understanding, even or especially with those with whom we disagree. Engage in conversation to get understanding, even with those with whom we disagree. especially with those with whom we disagree. Now that sounds simple enough, and yet the current complexion of personal, public, and political discourse has become woefully something other. Something which at its core does not seek understanding, but rather is rooted in the excoriation of a person or a group of people or a particular idea. The First Amendment allows for argument based on principle. Now, while Americans are bombarded by media, made for TV, and social media posts, I'm a Twitter fiend, that pervert this allowance and lauds personal attacks against bearers of dissonant ideas. The one who attacks with the most vitriol gets the airtime, the last word, and becomes the cause célèbre. Performed at its best, though, this civil discourse intersects at rhetoric and goodwill. Civil discourse is the inherent platform upon which opposing viewpoints can inform, persuade, and ultimately mobilize action. Action which would benefit the common good for all of the people and would certainly mitigate further harm when differences undergird divisions. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember the old days when debating positions and principles were public sport, from which the debaters retired come evening to break bread, to sip an adult beverage, and to smoke a stogie. For then we argued principle and we refrained from attacking the personal. Now, it's important to remember that civil discourse occurs at all levels of our lives, the public, the political, and the personal. So let's take them one by one. Let's start with public civility. Proverbs 12:18, rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. There was a time in very recent American history when the pulse of the people was measured by that time-worn, world-renowned, data-driven Gallup poll. It was used primarily to predict presidential wins as far back as Roosevelt. I know some of y'all remember the Gallup poll. And to lead in the Gallup poll was a sure indicator that you were going to win the election. Well, that was then, and things are different now. Today, it is no stretch of the imagination to say that the most popular mode of assessing the pulse of the people is just a few clicks away on social media. We update our status and we tweet, we Snapchat and we Vine, Periscope and YouTube, WordPress and Tumblr, we LinkedIn and we meet up. Name a subject and you can find out what people are talking about or whether they're talking about it and what they're saying. And unfortunately, social media, for all its possibilities and potentials, often becomes the platform through which our most uncivil discourse becomes public fodder. It was conceived to be a networking tool. Social media has, though, evolved into a petri dish of no filters, no boundaries, and for some, no common sense. Weekly, almost, we hear of someone getting fired for posting their true sentiments about a person or current event. Most of the time, they are not necessarily being fired for what they said, but how and where they said it. And usually the language is replete with expletives, vitriol, and everything that is the antithesis of civility. But in the best exercise of free speech, what is shared in the public sphere must include the basic matched tenets of civil discourse: respect and humility. What do I mean? So let's go back to our definition. Engage in conversation to get understanding, even with those with whom we disagree, especially with those with whom we disagree. This means we come to the conversation believing that we have something to share, and we leave room for the possibility that there is something that we can learn from the person or persons with whom we are in conversation. This inherently involves an admission, if only to ourselves, that we are open to the possibility that we don't know everything. And maybe, just maybe, there is the slimmest chance that clutch your pearls. We might be off track or just plain wrong in our long-held conclusions. And this acknowledgement that we are not in and of ourselves the font of all wisdom is the bedrock of the humility required as a hallmark of civil discourse. Similarly, we must approach our conversation with at least a moderate level of respect for our conversation partners. It is inherently human that we are predisposed to hear or learn from someone for whom we hold some respect. When we do not respect each other, it is hard to hear each other. Or going further, it is hard to acknowledge the legitimacy of the other's opinions, beliefs, or experience. Civil discourse, then, a conversation we engage in to get or enhance understanding, can only be had between two parties who both approach the dialogue with humility and respect. Lacking these two things, the conversation becomes an exercise in futility. Dueling monologues where neither party learns or grows or moves toward fulfillment. Now I know we are here at Dartmouth, which means we are all educated people, and we are sitting here saying, I respect everybody, I love everybody, and I approach every conversation with an open mind and with respect and humility. So when is she going to get to the part that applies to me? Well, let me challenge your assumption. I believe that what passes for respect these days has more to do with tolerance than genuine respect. Taking a look at the language you use, the foundation of civil discourse, let me lift up some examples from our current lexicon. In recent years, it has become quite de rigueur for people of all races to say with pride, I'm colorblind. I don't see color. Everyone is the same to me. Now, while I understand the noble sentiment behind these statements, they are maddening and disrespectful all the same. First, they are untrue. Unless you are blind or visually challenged, you do see color. You got up this morning and matched your socks to your shoes and your shirt to your pants. You absolutely see color just fine. Second, this statement, however well intended, is dismissive and demeaning to the experience of the person whose color you do not see. The fact is, I am a Black woman of African descent, and the peculiar challenges that our country has had and still has with race means that my experience, my entire life experience, can only truly be seen and understood through the prism of my race, of my gender. To say that you don't see my race is to say that you don't see me. And to say that you don't see my race is to say that you don't acknowledge that my experience is likely different from yours. And to come to conversation with this as a basis means that we are entering a playing field where one conversation partner has already dismissed and demeaned and delegitimized even before one word is spoken. And no authentic learning discourse can happen in that setting. We see, on a different lens, the same thing unfolding in this ongoing saga of Bill Cosby. Now, I am not here to argue his guilt or his innocence, and I am not here to press or dismiss the case that the women are making against him. What I have been mostly struck by is the passion that this issue has birthed. How all sides are talking past each other, and my fear that in the end, nothing constructive comes of any of it. From the time the allegations surfaced, there has been vitriol on both sides. And let me be clear, I have stood with women who have been raped, and I have stood with men who have been falsely accused. So I have seen it on both sides. As a pastor, I've seen it on both sides. And I see how both sides, the lives can be destroyed. Some in this case believe the women, some defend Cosby. Some sympathize with the women and understand why it has taken 30 years for the case to come to court, charges to be filed. And others defend the legacy and the life and the legend of Cosby. Check social media or any newspaper, and you will see that opinions and temperatures run high and hot on this subject. And there is a complete absence of anything even remotely resembling civility in the discussions. When people question why one of the accusers would have visited the hotel of a married man, the integrity of the alleged victim is impugned, and her agency and personhood is diminished and demeaned. When Team Cosby's defense presents data that contradicts some of the women's statement, and this data is knee-jerk rejected as a part of an alleged propaganda conspiracy, then we dismiss the personhood and the agency of Bill Cosby, who has been accused and who has a right in this country to defend himself. Now, while I am not here, as I stated, to take sides, for the record, I really have no position. I am troubled, however, on many levels, and I'm just watching and listening and waiting. But I do think that in all the vitriol about this specific case and all the focus on this specific set of people, we lose sight of an important opportunity to discuss, to engage in civil discourse around the issue of sexual violence. And I'm particularly concerned, as a woman of faith, about the silence of my co-laborers, co-faith leaders who have overlooked or refused to take this moment in history to address the secret shame of sexual abuse and its impact on their congregants. As a pastor, I am compelled to challenge my peers and colleagues to seize this opportunity to host conversations, not debates on Cosby's guilt or innocence, but on the silent suffering of rape survivors, of those who've been accused of abuse. There are Masoretic texts, Greek texts, Quranic texts, and other non-canonical texts which speak to the atrocities of sexual violence. And yet there has yet to be a public forum or collective response to the incidents that triggered these women's stories. And for us to remain silent is complicit violence. Civil discourse in the public arena must cover celebrity sensationalism and human suffering alike. As effective as public discourse is with petition signing and fund me causes, we must not allow it to be underutilized to deliver preventative and restorative justice. Sometimes you must be the one to call for the conversation and lead the conversation to understanding and to action. The tongues of the wise bring healing. We are a nation of people, men and women alike, who need healing. That's public civility. Let's move on to political civility, and you might imagine that I have a few thoughts on this. Just a few. I want to lift up a couple. As President Obama winds down his second term in office, pundits and idiots alike have been known to say something like, the president just wasn't able to get much done in these 8 years. This sets my teeth on edge, and I assume it to be an invitation to engage in civil discourse around the verb able. Understand now, to say with aplomb and conviction that the president was not able to get things done is a misstatement. Certainly, President Obama possesses the intellect, the wisdom, the courage, and the good sense to do the job of president just fine. His ability is beyond being called into question. What prevented the president's effectiveness, to the extent that you feel the president's effectiveness was prevented, was not a lack of ability on his part, but a lack of civility, for the most part, from the Republican-led United States Congress. Without fear of, I'm a Democrat, did you know? Without fear or filter, Republicans vowed 1 month into President Obama's first term that they would resist any and every attempt to enact any of his legislation. And for the past 7 years, they have kept their word. Imagine that. Congress actually kept their word on something to our detriment. Earlier this month, many of us paused midday to watch the president's press conference as he issued an executive order regarding gun control. And some were moved by his spontaneous display of emotion and tears when he mentioned Sandy Hook. Others took to social media to ridicule and dismiss the president's tears as somehow inappropriate for a world leader. A commentator on Fox went so far as to suggest that the president had placed a cut onion on the podium to help him manufacture tears. Now, where I come from, we tend to honor tears shed for lives lost to senseless violence. And we understand tears shed under such great weight of righteous indignation. But regardless of our opinion of his order or his tears, within his 37 minutes of comment, President Obama described a quintessential experience in civil discourse. He recalled prior efforts in 2013 to pass gun control legislation through the Senate. And he gave us a glimpse of what civil discourse could look like when he invited two A-rated NRA members, Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, and Pat Toomey, the Republican of Pennsylvania, to collaborate in partnership with Vice President Biden to draft gun control legislation. These two senators, representing Americans on what might be diametrically opposed platforms, came together, crafted legislation from different points of view, and ultimately sought to effect common sense laws for gun ownership. However, in spite of the rigor of their civil discourse, in spite of the give and take, in spite of the compromise embarked upon for the good of all Americans, President Obama reminded us this month that it failed because of Republican resistance, fueled by the National Rifle Association's willingness to twist words and distort intent, to inflame passions deeply held by many of our fellow Americans. And in spite of America having the most deaths related to gun violence of any advanced country in the world, in spite of the fact that 20 first graders were killed in their classrooms, this exercise of civil discourse failed. First graders. We couldn't fix it after first graders were killed. And today, the killings continue unabated. Now, no talk about words and their consequences could be complete without a discussion of the Donald. This year, we will go to the polls to elect our 45th president. Those of us in the business of politics call this the silly season. We know that as an American, we take our presidential election cycle seriously, and yet this one particular candidate vying for his party's nomination has dominated local and global airways with rhetoric and antics that have caused blight upon America's image and position as a world leader. I would say to the Donald, it's not funny anymore. It was funny in the beginning, it's not funny anymore. And in the most egregious display of civil discord, Donald Trump makes a mockery of our First Amendment right to free speech, the axis upon which civil discourse balances. His critics have called his speech self-aggrandizing and buffoonery. Others relegate his gruff and unfiltered manner as a mere extension of his made-for-television branding. From name-calling to birther allegations, proposing building border walls to keep our southern neighbors out, while flying in wives from European countries, and boasting of getting his way, always getting his way, all unflattering and prophetic insights to a presidency which would be devoid of collaboration, compromise, and most of all, civil discourse. Whatever international business savvy Trump might bring, or as we say at home, could bring, to bear, which means not at all, could bring, to bear favorably upon America's economy, such is gravely compromised by the fact that he has abused the opportunity for civil discourse at home and abroad. He masters an inflammatory wording, and he's now starring in the recruitment video of the greatest threat to America's safety and her people. Now, granted, this is America, and Donald Trump is entitled to his opinions. And our Constitution grants him the right to express his opinions freely and openly. And people are entitled to support his candidacy. But when Trump's speeches incite passions that lead a Muslim woman to be thrown out of one of his rallies, or that leads a crowd of his supporters at his rally to beat up an attendee who voiced opposition, then Trump bears a responsibility for the consequences of his words. Or remember when Carly Fiorina, is she still in the race, Carly Fiorina, used false data about Planned Parenthood to discuss the alleged sale of baby parts. Such statements and statements like them validate the extremist thinkers among our midst and give them license to take the law into their own hands, unwittingly encouraging someone who, for example, might shoot up a Planned Parenthood office in Colorado Springs. Now, while Trump himself didn't beat anyone up, and Carly Fiorina didn't shoot anyone, their words created the environment that allows such action to take place. And good leadership would dictate that they take responsibility for these consequences. Unfortunately, there is no guarantee that civil discourse ends party strife. I wish it would. Gun violence or wars, but still we must commit to civil discourse in the political arena. We must listen keenly to what is said, and we must be willing to engage in the hard work of listening, even and especially to those with whom we do not agree, to hear the words from their position, to try to find common ground in our humanity, if not in our policies. We must not allow pithy propaganda to replace the intellectual, philosophical, and ethical work of civil discourse. Civility is a choice and a discipline. And as we approach our next presidential election, I am inclined to challenge all of us to vote for civility and to hold our elected officials accountable for civil discourse and demand of them civility in the public square. Let's take a moment and look at personal civility. Let's do a reflecting exercise. Think about the last conversation you had before you walked into this room. However lengthy, however brief, however pleasant, however unpleasant. Now ask yourself whether your words landed in the ear of the other as hurtful, as thrust from a sword, or as wisdom and healing. What did you say? Think back again to a typical conversation you may have had with your most intimate relationship. Spouse, a significant other, child or roommate, dog, cat, parent, sibling, neighbor, relative, commuter, Uber driver. Now assess whether your words, what you said, regardless of context or triggers, could be weighed as civil. Was it honestly, perhaps, less than civil? The practice of civil discourse begins with a personal commitment to civility in our most basic and our most intimate relationships. Now, I'm not talking about being PC or tolerant. The ethos of being politically correct or tolerant has as its foundation the unspoken idea that the opposing viewpoint or the different person is the diminished other, and so we need to be politically correct in our language. And so we're going to tolerate them and their point of view. But as long as we can hold another person apart from us as the other, we tend to rationalize that civility is not necessary or it is a waste. For example, a few years back, the Black community in America began to prefer the term African American as a descriptor. Many outside of the community decried use of the new terminology. It was long. Why you got to do that? What's the matter with Black? Which is what they said with what's the matter with Negro? What's the matter with colored? What's the matter with nigger? What's the matter with whatever the other term was? And the most hostile of these people refused to use the term African American, and they decried their use of it as politically correct. To refuse to call me by the name that I have chosen for myself, and then to deride my decision and ultimately dismiss it, to continue to call me by a name which I have rejected and then tell me that you feel burdened to have to call me by my name is the height of arrogance. And we cannot have a conversation when you do not accept me as I am. Civil discourse requires a personal commitment to both persons' freedom, both conversations partners' freedom to speak their truth, that their truth would be heard, and that together understanding can be gained. Now, civil discourse begins at home. Civil discourse begins bedside and across the table. Civil discourse is worthy pursuit in partnership and in parenting, and it frees persons in intimate relationships to be their best selves and their most authentic selves instead of morphing into a shadow of who they might become. The challenge is this: will the next word out of your mouth in private pierce like a sword or bring healing? It is as simple as sincerely acknowledging and speaking kindly and respectfully to the person who serves your meal. Please and thank you. And it is profound as speaking lovingly to your friends and in your love relationships and to your mailman and to your roommate. As I near my conclusion, I want to spend my final few minutes talking about the kind of civil discourse that does not involve words. Dr. Maya Angelou told us, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, and people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." We've talked a bit today about the meaning of civil discourse and the value and consequence of words. But I am reminded of something that Senator Samuel Hayakawa once said: "Meanings are in people, not in words." Basically, talk is cheap. All the civil discourse in the world doesn't mean a thing if it is at odds with or contradicts one's action. There must be alignment between your words and your actions, because in the end, what you do matters and often lasts longer than what you say. Let me give you an example that is close to home, right here at Dartmouth. While we are considering the gravity of influence of civil discourse in the public square, my beloved college presents a quandary for me. I was invited to speak on this occasion commemorating the life of a master of civil discourse, Dr. Martin Luther King. And as an alum and an adherent of Dr. King's vision for a beloved community, I am honored. I am also aware that there are several other Dartmouth alums who could have quite easily fit the bill, just as suitable and just as capable. And I am confident that they would have delivered the goods. Likewise, I would like to believe that when the alumni department, alumni blunt, program The Informed Voter, Becoming an Informed Voter is the title of the panel, and it is scheduled for next month, February 27th, in Palm Beach Gardens. There existed the same demographics from which I came at their disposal for creating a panel to best facilitate civil discourse around becoming an informed voter. I would like to believe this, and yet the panel explicitly fails for facilitating civil discourse even before it occurs. As slated, the panelists are 5 white men and 1 white woman. This sends a less than subtle message that the expert and viability of information on the issues are possessed by white people, and predominantly white men. And therein lies passive silencing to the reality that according to the latest data, the turnout of eligible black voters was 66% in 2014, compared to 64% of eligible white voters. Further, the actual voting rate of registered voters was 43% for women, compared to 40.8% of men. To imply that blacks or other ethnic Americans or women are not invested, interested, or informed of civil issues, and it is an egregious conclusion, and thus thwarts a program for which civil discourse could take place and should take place. Now, I was told that the composition of the panel was made based on the composition of the faculty in the government department, which reveals another problem. But when viewed in the light of the report that the Provost's office recently issued affirming Dartmouth's commitment to diversity at every level, it would appear that we are saying one thing and doing another. Our actions are not aligned with our words. And I raise this critique of the college that I love so much for us to consider what we are saying and who we are silencing by hosting such a panel where the gatekeepers are historically privileged and who do not represent the constituencies of our democracy or the constituencies of Dartmouth. We can do better, Dartmouth, and we have to do better. We must insist that our theorizing today transform that and every public opportunity we have to present the college to the world and to host civil discourse. We must insist that the college's words match the college's actions and that the actions match the words. We must insist that this place that we love so much be a place that encourages, nurtures, advances spoken and unspoken discourse. That is to engage in conversation that enhances our understanding, even and especially with those who are different from us, even and especially those with whom we disagree. The proverb says life and death is in the power of the tongue. Now, that's not really literal, because your tongue will not kill or enliven anyone. But the content of your words, the meaning behind them, can hurt or can heal. So I want to encourage us to rediscover the art and the power of civil discourse. Not only holding public personalities to a refreshing standard, but also holding ourselves accountable in our most intimate relationships, in our public spheres of influence, and also where we are called to lead and to serve. Through our words, we can wound, and through our words, we can heal. Someone is always and ultimately affected by our words. Will you use your words to silence or to set free? Will your words tell the whole truth or imply comfortable facts? Words are a most powerful tool for effecting change and stalling progress. What words will you choose? And when you choose your words more carefully, will you choose to engage in conversation, to get understanding, even with those with whom you disagree, even and especially with those with whom you disagree? Thank you. God bless you. Am I done? Okay. Okay, I'm taking a few. Okay, I'm taking questions and I'm asking people to wait for the microphone. Oh, okay. 2016. That means you're a senior. Okay.
Thank you so much. You highlighted
I
in the
remember you.
You do?
Weren't you in the class I just spoke to?
No.
No, okay.
Someone who looks like me. I think you, at the beginning, you talked a little bit about how technology is changing discourse. And one thing that I've noticed here and in other places is that I think people, when they know they're being recorded or watched or videotaped, are very hesitant to speak their real opinions, and they just kind of, not much is said. Everyone kind of is very careful with their words. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how we can have difficult conversations even though we know we're being recorded, filmed, and that those opinions that we present will be available to everybody.
Yeah, and I think that's something we have to work on as a culture. There are some, I tweet a lot, and sometimes I go on Facebook. I don't discuss controversial things on Twitter because you can't in 140 characters. So that causes you to be unnecessarily tight with words, and the issues that we are dealing with today are too nuanced for Twitter, right? So I think as a culture, though, we have developed And we need to develop a mindset of civil discourse where we can hear as well as we speak. And so often we are busy putting forth an opinion, and that's the end of the conversation. And there is no room that we allow for the struggle around an issue, for us to all to get to a truth. And I will use gay marriage or same-sex marriage as an example. Many people of goodwill, particularly depending on your age, you struggle with, okay, I'm trying to make sense of what I am coming to understand and appreciate with what my old values were. But there was no place really safe for us to have a discussion about it, because you were maybe labeled, you may be dismissed. You're stating that I'm struggling, I'm trying to get there, and I'm gonna get there, but I need to talk this through. I need to work it through. I need to have a conversation about it in a safe place where I can reach the conclusion that I want to reach. And so I think as a society, and particularly as a college, we have to create spaces for people to have respectful difference of opinion and respectful dialogue, because you will not get to a quality decision or a quality understanding if one person's or one partner's speech is constrained. If they feel like they can't really express what's in their heart and what's in their opinion, as they are trying to get understanding. But the basis of this, we're trying to all get understanding. And when we create, I experienced this in seminary, when we create an environment where alternate opinions are dismissed and demeaned and not welcome, then it creates hostility, and that is the fodder for some of the anger that we see, that we experience in our homes, in our households, on our streets, in the country these days. It's because people feel like they can't express what they want to express without being diminished or demeaned. So I think for those of us who deal in social media, I'm always conscious when I'm on camera, because this is the age of the sound clip, right? So out of this whole speech, somebody's going to take one line and say, this is what she talked about, and I'll spend 2 weeks beating that back. And I don't know if there's anything we can do that outside of changing the larger culture. So we're sensitive to it, but I think at some point we who want to do better have to require something different. We have to require that we don't talk in sound bites. As part of my protest, I don't do it on Twitter. I'm not going to discuss this with you on Twitter, because I can't. It's nuanced, and it is disrespectful of the issue to try to do it in a soundbite. And I think those of us who understand that need to begin to say, this is nuance, and I want to be respectful of the issue, and so I'm not going to condense what you said into a soundbite that gets capsulized and shot across the world and then becomes the definition of who I am and my personality. I refuse to participate.
In our political system, do you think our two-party system leads us to a black and white world where everybody is either right or either wrong? I mean, I find that very frustrating in our world, and I feel like that's our political system that sets us up for this cultural dynamic where it's A or B and that's it.
You know, I don't know. Of course, now I'm a Democrat. So I don't know that it's the two-party system. I think it's really more cultural. Because there was a time when I got out of college and I went to work on the Hill, the discourse was different. It was civil and respectful. You didn't talk about people's children. It was about the issues, and it was never personal. And even at the end of the day, as I said in my speech, you'd wind up at the Capitol Grill with the Republicans. Because I came up in that time, most of my friends are Republicans. Because it wasn't about... it wasn't personal. It was about our different ways of seeing and understanding the world. And so I don't know that if you had a third party it would be any different. When Ralph Nader ran, it didn't make it any different. It was just another voice in the fray, and gave people another place to go. But it was still as, toxic in a way that wasn't helpful. So I don't know that the two-party system, having a third or a fourth or a fifth party, changes that. I really think the parties become a reflection of the culture. And the culture that we're in has created this soundbite, 24-hour news cycle where he's got to have something to talk about all the time. I don't know what we did when it was just Walter Cronkite for 1 hour. We got all the news we needed in 1 hour. And now CNN is 24 hours, and so they have to have something to talk about. And so this constant regurgitation and recycling of news to fill the time just creates this environment where it's just soundbite after soundbite after soundbite, a new celebrity after new celebrity after new celebrity, and then I won't even get into reality TV and what that has done to reinforce this culture of fake celebrities, people who are famous for nothing. Don't produce anything, haven't created anything, they're just famous. For what? Why is Kim Kardashian famous? I don't know, but she's got a gazillion Twitter followers. And she's done nothing. Nothing. I mean, nothing. So whoever's going to shoot this out, if you could just send the Kim Kardashian thing out. Tweet that.
Would you speak to the place of time in civil discourse? One of the things that you mentioned is the art and power of civil discourse. And I feel like in a 10-week term, for example, here at Dartmouth, I'm moving from one thing to another. And part of civil discourse is dealing with complexity and ambiguity and having the I feel like on a cultural level, there's a commitment to efficiency versus effectiveness. And I'd love to have you speak to that.
I think you're right. I think that's the time in which we live. I call it the microwave generation. We expect a whole meal in 2 minutes. Press cook, and it's supposed to be done. And we don't, that's the culture we live in, as opposed to when I was growing up, where meals required grocery store. And my grandmother went to the grocery store every day, because that's what old black people did. They went every day to the store to buy what was fresh. So in this time where we expect Stouffer's macaroni and cheese in 45 seconds, we do value efficiency over it's not nearly as good as my grandmother's macaroni and cheese, but it's quick. And so that's what we reduced our culture to what's quickly said, Twitter, 140 characters, versus the nuanced discussion of an issue and topic, or even getting to know someone in a real way. Not where did you go to school and where did you come from and what language did you speak and where did your parents go. No, like really what makes them tick. We rarely take that time. And I think the only way that changes is that groups of us have to say, I'm just not, I want to do the slow way. I want the macaroni and cheese that takes 45 minutes. Stouffer's is good, but it's not good. Some of us want the good time for a short time. But I think we have to commit individually and in groups to saying we want something different. Because you're right, issues do require, there's a complexity around issues that requires time, that requires thought. It won't happen in one conversation. Part of the Dartmouth experience is you'll find conversations you have in the first year extend, if you do it right, will extend over your 4 years. And things that you learned freshman year, you'll still be building on in your senior year. And Dartmouth provides the experience and the diversity of opportunity to allow you to layer your learnings one upon the other. And so it becomes interdisciplinary, and you take that with you when you go into the world.
First off, thanks for your speech. That was some great words. I'm not sure the best way I can eloquently phrase this question, so I'll give it my best.
Go ahead.
Sometimes I feel like as a politically moderate white male, it's kind of weird to know how to express your opinion because I believe institutional racism exists. I believe we need more diverse faculty members. But at the same time, sometimes I disagree with the more hardline stance methods that some of the protesters here have used. And you get into this weird situation where you feel like if you have a discussion with anyone other than your one or two closest friends, you can really get hit hard from either side.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could possibly share your thoughts on that.
And that's a difficult issue because I grew up in a very activist household where we did marches and rallies, and so I understand. I was birthed and raised in that community. So imagine me coming to Dartmouth. Culture shock. So I understand what you're saying, and I think in the context of what we talked about today, it requires openness on both sides. Because, and it gets back to humility and respect. If I think that my way is the only way, then that disrespects you and what your opinion and what your thoughts might be, and shows a complete lack of humility on my part. Now, I will tell you personally, when first of all, leaving my activist, radical, revolutionary Brooklyn neighborhood to come to Dartmouth was a problem for me. Now, my father, who was the leader of the movement, was great, and he said, go where you can get the best education, but the people in the organization with which we worked thought I was crazy. Why are you going to school with those white people? But what I learned from my dad and from his leadership was that we all contribute. We have a way that we can each contribute, and we need to find the way that we can do that. The most important thing is that we agree on the goal. We will all have different tactics for how we achieve the goal. Now, I chose to go into the political world. Some of them still thought I was crazy. You're working with those white people and they not gonna, okay, which was fine until I was running a convention and they all wanted to come. But that's the way I contribute to the advancement of African American people and women, because I found my space there. That doesn't make the people with a protest sign wrong. Right? It's just different, but we're striving for the same goal. Where I have a problem is when they tell me that I'm wrong for doing something different. And how come you're not on the line with me? Well, because I got to do something over here, but we all working for the same goal. Or when I say, you people should go sit down, because those things don't work anymore. Knock the shanty. I was here during Shantytown, when my sister was. She's 87. She was here during Shantytown when we were trying to divest Dartmouth from South Africa. Knock the shanties down. You don't need that. Why are you living on the green? Their method of moving us forward is as valid as my method of working in electoral politics, is as valid as the economists trying to figure out a way to lift people from poverty, which is as valid as the person who's feeding the homeless. When we begin to place value on whose way is better, or to say, I disagree with you because I don't think it requires all that, then we are diminishing and demeaning their thought process and their way of doing business. So I say to you, my brother, listen, if that's the way they think, if you are in alignment on the goal, then let them use the tactics that they think are necessary, and you use the tactics that you think are necessary. As long as we're getting to the end together, then what difference does it make? We all striving for the same thing. And which is really people's right to self-determination, and for us all to live the best life that we can live and have our piece of the American dream. But that's what we want. That's what everybody wants, right? So you choose the way that works for you, and don't judge them. Let them choose the way that works for them, and they shouldn't judge you. Make sense?
Hi, Reverend Daughtry. Thanks for your talk today. Really great. I'm just wondering, as a woman of faith, how your faith was interwoven throughout your entire talk today. How has being a woman of faith shaped your political involvement and some of the decisions you've made in terms of deciding to get involved with politics?
My faith is at the foundation of everything that I do, everything. It informs, it guides, it encourages, it nurtures, and is the locus around which I build everything. So I was raised in church. I'm a 5th generation pastor. My great grandfather, I think that's the right number of greats, was a preacher during enslavement, and so we've been pastors ever since. So I grew up in a way that faith was the center. I like to say the church was the 7th member of our family. Its needs were considered just like everybody else's. But in our tradition, and in the principles that at which I was raised, what was most important was that we understood that the principle of the gospel of Jesus Christ is that we are all here, and God intends for us to live fulfilling, abundant lives here on earth, and that we should all work to ensure that all of us, not one, not two, but all of us, are able to live a life full of joy and peace and prosperity. For us, that meant growing up in Brooklyn, New York, where none of that was apparent to us who lived in the hood. It was the ghetto back then, now it's the hood. That meant that we undertook a struggle for freedom and self-determination against forces of police brutality, against the mayor, against anybody who was standing in the way of us achieving the goal of self-determination and freedom. That meant we advocated for, we helped to elect people who would change policy, but it also meant we spent a fair amount of time at rallies and marches. In the course of my growing up in that, I saw that politics was a way for me to achieve what I understood the principles of the gospel to be. So that's how I sort of came to so that was when I was 6, we were picketing the A&P because they didn't hire black people. When I was 8, we were going to Albany to help, or Buffalo to help elect somebody to the assembly. So I grew up in that kind of way. For me, the more critical question was how my values led me to the Democratic Party. I was going to be political because I saw that as a means to an end. And for me, what I understood when I reflected upon the principles of my faith and what I learned from the Bible and what I was taught in Sunday school and what I taught in Sunday school and the sermons I heard, the values that I heard in Scripture around caring for the least of these, about being as concerned for the other as I am for myself, and of the understanding that I don't succeed if you don't succeed, and all of us have to rise together. Those values I saw mirrored in the values of the Democratic Party more closely than I saw in the Republican Party. And so that's why I signed up, and I've worked for the party, for a party 12 years, but also for Democrats in some respect, on some level, since I got out of college and before I got out of college. I was here, yeah. I worked on Reverend Jackson's campaign in '84. That was my first presidential. This is now my 9th presidential. And I ran his campaign here in Hanover, and that's how I got into presidential politics. I turned 18 that year, and I registered to vote, and I voted from here. So but for me, it was an alignment of my values that I were closely held, strongly held. Now, I am a faithful citizen, which means I'm going to vote. Give unto Caesar all of that. I go to vote. I do not miss an election. And I got to vote for somebody. Jesus is not on the ballot. So who mirrors my values as closely as they can? Other than me running for office, which I'm not going to do, I got to find somebody or some party that mirrors as closely as possible what I believe in my spirit and in my soul. And for me, that was the Democratic Party.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate everything you've said so far. I have become rather despondent this election cycle, I think, but really in the last 5 or 6 years. Will we ever see a return to decent discussion and debate without all the overtones that we've had to suffer through, especially the last 1 year?
It's
in your
horrible,
opinion?
isn't it?
It is. And
It is horrible.
I'll just add a premise that you don't have to disagree or agree with, but I really unfortunately think that a lot of this has to do with the majority of white people in this country being very, very unhappy that we have an African-American president. I think that was a lot of the Republicans the first month saying what they said, that jerk from South Carolina yelling out liar to the president. And I hope, I wish I could see some more light at the end of the tunnel. I'm just curious if you see light at the end of the tunnel to get back to a decent place. Well,
I have to quote what Bishop Tutu said, I'm a prisoner of hope. And so every day I hope, this is my 9th presidential, as I've said, and I've watched it, the level of conversation, the level of debate changed dramatically from the days when I started in 1984 to now. We have more debates and they're saying less. And you really don't understand who's supporting what, and it has become personal. The attacks are personal. They attack each other personally. But you know what? They wouldn't do that if there wasn't something in our culture that accepted that and that responded to that. What people tweeted last night during the Republican debate, I didn't watch it because I refuse. I watched Child Genius, which is fascinating. There's some students on there we should keep an eye on, by the way. But what was tweeted were not what anybody's policy positions were. What was on the Twitter timeline was who attacked who, what they said, and so it becomes this self-perpetuating, self-fulfilling prophecy. We say we hate it, but we read it. We say we hate it, but we respond to it, and that's all we talk about is how crazy they were. And Cruz attacked Bush. Cruz attacked Trump, and Trump went after Jeb, and that don't know what issue they talked about yet. And I think, going back to my earlier point, there has to be a point at which we say, okay, we're not doing this anymore. We need substantive. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. We don't respond. We're not going to be engaged at this level. And if you can't talk to me about serious policy, even if I don't understand it all, I want it to sound like something substantive, then I'm not going to respond as a voter. You don't get my vote, just on principle. If we're going to engage in this kind of uncivil conversation, where we cannot elevate the dialogue or debate to something around which I need to cast my vote around, then you can't get my support. And I will go to another party. I will go to a third party, unless we're going to talk about issues. I'm hopeful. I'm always hopeful that it'll change, but I have to be hopeful, because what else is there? Thank you. Nancy.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing civil discourse that you have had with someone, especially with whom you disagree, where because you've been able to stay in that zone of civility, you've had an aha, a gift from them to kind of give us encouragement why that's worth it.
I will tell you something that happened to me when I was at Dartmouth 1,000 years ago. I was a freshman living in Russell Sage, and I was down doing my laundry. There was a young woman nearest the door, if you know Russell Sage. Well, I don't know what it looks like now, but back then it was a long row of washing machines. You came in at the front door. There was a young white woman there doing her laundry. She was an upperclassman. I was a lowly freshman. I walked past her. This white guy behind me. We both walked in together. I walked past her, opened the lid, and started reading the directions. He walked past both of us, opened the lid, and he turned to me, "So how do you do laundry?" And I paused because I said, okay, if I take this at the best level, he sees we're both starting together, and so he's asking me. I didn't choose to take it at the best level. And I said, now how he gonna walk past a woman who's doing her laundry? In the midst, she was folding. And walk past her, come to me. I said to him, excuse me? He said, I'm just wondering if you could tell me how to do the laundry. I said, I don't know, because my housekeeper does the laundry at home. Let's ask her. And he stopped, and he turned red, and he said, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I said, you assumed that I knew how to do. Why didn't you assume that we should ask her? He said, he said, you're right. I made an assumption because, and then he went into, we don't have very many black people where I'm from. So it was all manner of ratchet. I mean, just all manner of wrong. But we talked about it and said, you made an assumption about me never seen me before, based on the color of my skin. Skip past, who was clearly knowledgeable. She was folding. I'm standing there, and of course, we didn't have a housekeeper. I mean, I knew how to do laundry. That was not the point. The point was, he and I then got into a conversation about what his assumptions had been and why they had been. And and I listened to him, and then I understood, okay, what his view of Africa, of black people, because we were black back then, is what he's seen on television, on the Jeffersons, and on, that this is what black people do, is the laundry. And that was his mindset. And so me being at Dartmouth, we had a whole conversation. Me being at Dartmouth was like a shocker for him. It's like, oh my God, black people at Dartmouth. And they're not doing the laundry. He had a mindset adjustment. God bless him. I don't know where he is now. But it was a moment of, let me hear him, because I didn't take him to Brooklyn, which I started to. That means I didn't get really angry with him, and my accent didn't come out. I just said, okay, let me try to hear what he's saying and why he would assume that. And then he heard me on how dismissive he was being of who I was as a student, a fellow student who's here trying to figure out the washing machine. That was my freshman spring, I think. And that helped me, as I had struggled through fall and winter in a different culture, to understand, okay, a lot of this isn't malice. A lot of what I've experienced, now some of it was malice, but a lot of what I experienced my first year wasn't malice. It was a lack of understanding and a lack of experience. And to the extent I could help them understand and they could help me understand where they were coming from, then it would help me in my career, and it has. It was like, okay, let me try to hear because I start with I love everybody. And I believe that there is a heart of good in everyone. So if I can try to find it and hear it, even where I don't agree, then I can create the space for agreement. And even if we don't agree, at least we can work together respectfully. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate you. God bless you.